Hello, it's week 12 of season 7 of the Andy Griffith Show. This week's episode title is Only a Rose. The Mayday Garden Club is having a meeting, and Clara introduces a special guest, Mr. Simmons of the Simmons Seed Catalog. And he says he's honored once again to have been chosen to be the judge in all the divisions in next week's flower show. He says the biggest division this year will be the Hybrid Rose Contest. And the winner will get cash and will get named and photographed as the winner in next year's seed catalog after the company propagates the rose. But Clara has won this contest, this division of the contest, the Rose Division, for 7 years in a row now, and Aunt Bee keeps trying to enter, or entering and trying to win. And she tells Clara this year she's going to enter a rose again this year, and she says, "May the best rose win." And Clara gets kind of sarcastic and says, "Yeah, it always does." And the next day, after Andy compliments the Pansies that Floyd is going to enter in the Tansy division, Floyd says things seem a little tense between Auntie and Clara. And Andy says, "Yeah, that always happens." And then he says Aunt Bee has been working on her entry for a year now. And Floyd says, maybe this'll be the year that she knocks off Clara Edwards for a change. And later, Aunt Bee is showing Andy her rose in the backyard and telling him how she's going to move it into the sunlight to make it bloom at the right time. And then they catch Miss Kincaid next door eavesdropping on their conversation. Yeah, she's the friend of Clara and the neighbor of Andy and Aunt Bee, who had told Clara that she's going to try to find out whether Aunt Bee has a serious entry this year. And then after Andy catches Miss Kincaid eavesdropping, he goes back and tells Aunt Bee, "We've got a spy." And then we see Clara in her backyard talking to all her flowers and spraying them for aphids. And then Miss Kincaid comes by and she says she heard that Aunt Bee does have a rose to enter this year. And she says she also heard that Bee called Clara uppity. And Clara says she's just jealous. And when Clara confronts Aunt Bee about it, Bee says, "Well, you do have an attitude about the rose contest. And anyway, I heard that you called me an amateur behind my back." And Bee says, "One year I might just surprise you." And then she walks away. And later we see that Aunt Bee's rose has bloomed, so she's all happy about it. And she shows Andy it's a beautiful rose, and then she goes to register for the contest. And Ultie and his friend Dilly start throwing a football in the backyard near the rose, but Ultie throws it too much to the side, and Dilly don't catch it, and the football hits the rose and breaks the stem. And then we see Clara and Aunt Bee down at the contest registration, and they're being catty with each other again. Back to Ultie and Dilly, they're trying to fix the stem of the flower with Scotch tape. And then Andy and Aunt Bee come in the backyard to take pictures of the rose. First Aunt Bee holds it for a picture of her and the rose together, and then Andy takes a close-up of just the rose. They don't notice the damage. And that night in bed, Opie is feeling guilty when he hears Opie or his dad and Aunt Bee on the porch all happy about the rose. Of course, they don't know yet about the damage. And then Andy says the only bad thing about this contest is that he hates seeing Aunt Bee and Clara on the outs like this. They've been friends so long. And Aunt Bee says it's not my doing. She's always been competitive. And Andy says, "Well, try to be a gracious winner tomorrow." And the next morning, Andy finds Ultie looking at the broken rose. It's looking poorly. And Ultie breaks down and tells his pa what happened. And Andy's not mad, but he realizes how bad this will be for Aunt Bee. And he says he'd better be the one to break it to her. But Ultie brings the rose in before Andy can get to the point, and when she sees it, she's real upset. And they get dressed up and go to the flower show, even though Andy says, "Let's skip it this year." And Aunt Bee says, "No, I've got to do this." And they call for Opie to come with them to the flower show, but he says he's got something to do, and he'll meet them there. And at the show, Floyd wins first place in the Pansy division. And when the Rose division comes up, Andy tells Clara what happened to the rose and why Aunt Bee didn't enter it in the contest after all. And then Ultie comes rushing in with a gift for Aunt Bee. And she opens it, It's an enlargement that Althea got made of the close-up tincture that Andy took of the rose. Right after the accident, and before it had started drooling. And everyone likes it, including Clara, sitting right behind them. And when they announced that Clara won first prize again, she asked to take the tincture up there, and she tells everyone that Aunt Dee's rose is deader, and she has them change the first place ribbon to the tincture that Althea brought. And then Aunt Dee has Clara over her cookies, and she says that was a very nice thing that you did. And they agree never to let anything like a contest come between them again. We'll see you next week for episode 13.